Hello, welcome to EF Academy. Now, these are the measurements you need, and these are the materials you need. So, we're going to be looking at the first method of cutting a contoured skirt. Okay, so I'm just going to come down from the top of my pattern paper by 1 inch. Okay, this line is going to serve as my waistline. Okay, it's going to serve as my beginning line. So I'll just connect the dots that I have made to give me a straight line. Now from that waistline, I'm going to get my skirt length. In this case, I used 20 inches skirt length. All right, I'm going to mark as many points as possible so that I can have a straight line. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and join my line with a straight ruler. Now, after making this point, I'm going to get a divide my hip by 2. All right, and I'm going to mark it. Now I divided the hip by 2 because in this pattern I'm going to draft both the front and back the same time. All right, that is why I divided my hip by 2. So the space I have is going to be enough for me to draft the front part of the skirt and the back part of the skirt. Now I'm going to get my waist to hip length. I'm going to mark it. In this case, I used 9 inches, right? Okay, so marking my waist here, I'm going to connect the points I've made. Remember, I'm making as many points as possible so I can have a straight line. Now, I'm just trying to label my lines, my waistline, my hip line, and then my knee line. Okay, so I'm going to divide this space I have into 2 so that I can have both my front and back, like I said. So that is the hip divided by 2. The hip we have on this pattern divided by 2. Or you can do the total hip divided by 4. So here I'm using the hip divided by 2. The hip of this pattern divided by 2. Right? So I'm marking it both on the waistline, the hip line, and the knee line because what I want to do is divide this pattern into 2. So I'm going to connect it using a straight line. Now we have the front and back part. Okay, so for the waist, I'm going to use waist divided by 4, right? For the hip, it is hip divided by 4. Please note I have not added any form of allowance in this pattern. Now for the knee, I'm deducting 2 inches from the hip. That's what I'll use for my knee. But firstly, I'm coming up from the knee by 2 inches. That is where I'm going to mark my knee. Right? I'd like to do this because I like working with it. It gives me a result I like. Now I'm just going to connect my points from the waist to the hip to the knee. Right? So I use dotted points from waist to hip because I've not added that allowance. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark my darts. That is my nipple to nipple bust span divided by 2. In my case, I have 7 divided by 2. That is 3.5. So for the dart length, I'm using 5 inches, right? So I'm just going to connect my points. Now on both sides of the dart leg, I'm going to mark ½ inch. That is what I'm going to use for my dart. So ½ inch plus ½ inch, that is 1 inch. I'm going to replace that back to the side of my front skirt, right? Because I didn't add any dart allowance initially. So I'm not going to connect it properly to the hip. Now the front is done. Over to the back. I'm going to mark my waist just like I did for the front, right? I'm going to mark my waist starting from the center back. Now my hip is already there. That's the meeting point of both the front and back. Now for my back knee, the 2 inches I deducted from the side of the front, I'm going to mark it both on the center back and the side back. That is 1 inch. I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides. Now this gives me a result I like working with. This is contouring the skirt to follow the shape of the human body. Okay, Now this is going to make the hip area rounded, and that is what we are trying to achieve, so that the skirt follow the human body. The skirt is going to follow the body of anybody you're making it for. Now I'm connecting my waist to my hip using a dotted line, because that is not my final line. Now I'm going to mark my that, just like we did for the front, 3.5 inches. Now for the length of the back, that I'm using 4 inches, right? So now I'm also going to take half inch on both sides of the dart leg for the back dart. Then after which I connect it. Then do not forget to replace your dart. It is very important. I'm going to replace my 1 inch dart back to the side of the back. Now I've done that. Now for the back waist, I'm going to come in by 1 inch. I'm taking 1 inch from there and I'm putting it by the side. Now I'm doing this because I want that back waist to be properly contoured. I want it to sit right. Okay, I don't want to have zip bulge, and I just want it to follow the shape of the butt. Okay, remember it's rounded and not straight. That is why we're doing all this, to have all our curves in the right places. Now I'm going to go ahead to add my zip allowance. We do not have that, so I'm adding 1.5 inches uniformly from the waist to the knee. Okay,
after which you connect your
doing.
Points as usual. Then now I'm connecting my points. Okay, now take note of how I'm using this ruler, the pattern master, to connect my points. I don't want to have sharp edges. Okay, so I use the rounded sides to avoid sharp edges. Now I'm striking out the places I'm going to cut out, and then I'm trying to label the front. I wrote cut on fold. Okay, this will enable my tailor or anybody who's going to put this skirt together know what to do with the pattern. Now for the front, I'm going to come down by half inch, right? Coming down by half inch because the back should be higher than the front. Now I don't want to add extra inches to the back, so I'm just going to come down on the front side by half inch. I'm going to connect it back to the waist. Now this gives me a result I'm happy with. Now I'm only talking about the result because this is a pattern I've worked with, and then I like the result I get from them. It gives you well-rounded fitted skirts. So now I'm getting my band. Remember that initially we didn't deduct our band, so I want to cut off my band from this pattern. I took 1.5 inch from the waist down. Okay, so I'm just going to follow the points I have for the front, same thing as the back, right? I'm trying to label the patterns so as not to mix it up, right? Now I'm going to cut out what I have. I'm going to cut out the entire pattern, remove the excesses, and then trace out the actual pattern I'm working with. So I'm cutting it out. Yeah, I'm trimming out the allowances. Now this is what we have. This is what we'll have as our final skirt. I'm going to cut out the band so that I'll be able to close the dart. It is very important to close the dart of the band because you don't want to sew dart on band. Okay, so you're just going to close it so that when you trace out, the dart will be eliminated. So I'm just going ahead to close the darts with a masking tape. I'm doing the same thing for the front and the back. Okay, so remember we do not have sewing allowance on this pattern, so you're just going to add your sewing allowance to the waist, to the band, to the side, and then to the lower side. That's the knee, and that is all for this pattern.